Sex. Always helps. I wonder why it's so crowded today. My name is Frans Kroeze and I'm the chairperson of tonight. I would like to welcome you here on the second lecture of Studium Generale on sex. And last week we learned, last Tuesday, we learned that sex was not for fun till the 80s, 1800 whatever. Yeah. So what we will learn today is that if you do not know yet, sex can be fun. Yeah. And so that it's going to be a very special lecture today. And I'm very pleased to introduce you to Dr. Janniko Georgiadis. He's working here as an assistant professor at the Department of Neurosciences of the University Medical Center in Groningen. Yeah? And he studied movement sciences, and after that he did a PhD that he received in 2007 in medical sciences, and the title of his PhD was about the orgasm, the orgasmic brain. Yeah? So he is very interested as far as his work concerns, yeah, about the neurobiology of sex in humans. Yeah? And besides that, he's lecturing in anatomy. He's also an expert in anatomy. But other than that, he's doing research on sexual behavior. And currently, he is writing a book with the title "Your Head Full of Sex." Yeah? So if you are intrigued by his lecture, if you are going to be excited by his lecture, yeah, you know what you can do on the internet. But the other thing you can do is buy his book that will appear by the end of the year or last year. Yeah? So I can tell you it is going to be a very exciting lecture. Yeah? Janniko Georgiadis.
Thank you. Hey, this is working, great. Thank you, Frans, for the kind introduction. And thank you for trying to sell my book before it's even written. It's always good to have people on your side. It's really great to see so many of you here. This is going to be a lecture about preference, and you preferred being here over the Dutch national team playing against Romania. Okay, so I'm very, very appreciative of that. So this will... So in spite of all Frans's kind words, this will actually be a very dull lecture, because the science of sex is not very exciting. And we try to really structure sex and make it very organized and make it very sort of, you know, not very exciting anymore. We just take away all that is different between people and try to find commonalities. So this is a warning, you know, this is not going to be as exciting as you thought it would. On the other hand, you might actually learn something today, and we might even at the end of the lecture understand this very peculiar man that is you've probably been staring at for a couple of minutes now, and he's been staring back at you, as you can see. And he always has this special greeting for you. Not sure why, but would you consider this man normal? So who considers this man normal? There's a few hands. So who considers this man to be abnormal? Yeah, that's the majority. So whether we find this, we don't even know whether this is his preference. But if we just assume that he has a preference for dressing up like a woman and making love to a plastic pig, he actually has a plastic cow that he can probably, you know, change animals. But if we assume that this is his preference, whether we find that normal or not would really have to depend on our moral framework. We can't say that this is not average, probably. Okay. I don't know you guys, but this is probably not average. So another question, is this functional? Is this a sexuality that is functional? So who wants to share some thoughts on this question with the audience? Or do you think this is dysfunctional? Because that's a better word, right? Is it dysfunctional? Is this a sexual dysfunction? Okay. Well, there may be nothing wrong with his sexual function. You know, this guy, well, we can't actually see, but he may have an erection. He may have full ejaculatory capacity, and he may have very potent sexual desire. Okay, so this may be a sexually very functional man. So whatever we think of this man really depends on how we think about sex. So we all, probably all of us, or most of us, grew up believing that sex is for reproduction. And some of us may even believe that it equals reproduction. And this is not our fault, obviously. It's the fault of the way we are brought up. And whether you are a religious person or whether you are someone who believes in Darwinism and evolutionary theory, it basically comes down to the same thing. And that is that sex, in the end, is for reproduction and for nothing else. Of course, the Christian side of things is a bit more aggressive, if you will, and every sexual activity that was not for reproduction or for procreation was prohibited, and people who still decided to do it, and that just shows you how strong the system is, were punished very severely. In Darwinism, of course, everything is about reproductive fitness and trying to promote your genes in the best possible way. And people would be looking for cues of reproductive fitness, among which, you know, large breasts and very muscular men and whatnot more. Okay, so these are both quite deterministic views on sexuality. There is another way to look at this, and this is a good colleague and friend of mine from Canada. He's actually a professor. He doesn't really look like one, but Jim Faust, who has this very interesting way of looking at it, and so this is a quote from him, saying that sexual reward and reproduction are separate and highly flexible processes that can interact under the right circumstances. And this is basically saying that sex, or that reproduction, is a byproduct of sex. Okay? And it's sometimes wanted and sometimes not. And this adds a very interesting dimension to the equation. Okay? Because basically it adds a tremendous flexibility to the system, because through experience with sexual reward, we are able to choose who we want to have sex with and who we don't want to have sex with, and where we want to have sex and when we want to have sex, etc., etc. Of course, a reward is not the only experience that we have in the sexual domain, but it is a very important one. Okay, so basically you can look at it like a palette of colors, right? So there may be, but we really don't know for sure, but there may be features of people that we like, are attracted to, that are sort of innate and fixed, and we are born with it. And most men may be born with an innate attraction to women, and most women may be born with an innate attraction to men. But even that is not entirely certain. And there may be other fixed predispositions in our brains. But what experience does is that within the boundaries of whatever predispositions exist, it creates this tremendous variation of preferences. And really, you know, we can prefer many types of people. And some of these people do not really look like they are reproductively fit. Okay? This is Bill Gates before he became. Bill Gates will sort of resurface during this. So that's interesting. You never probably thought about Bill Gates in a sexual context, but he will come back later on during this talk. And so there are many preferences. You know, you can choose whatever you prefer. But what I think that the system does, this system of experience, and it creates a variation that in the end promotes genetic diversity. And that may be the most important evolutionary mechanism of all. The fact that we create so many versatility of people that would probably be able to survive in many different circumstances. Because Bill Gates, I'm not sure when he, like, I don't know, 2,000 years ago, he may not have survived very long. But now, he's like a very wanted and very successful man. If sexual or experience with sexual reward is important, we may want to have a look at the structure of that reward and how it works and how we can look at it. So one way to look at sex and a sexual response, and of course this is something that starts happening from puberty, and this is a very important period, I will come back to that later, is that typically when people start responding sexually, they go through a cycle of events and behaviors. So this is actually very old. This red line was drawn for the first time, I think, by Theodor van der Velde, a very not very famous Dutch sexologist, but it was sort of reinvented by Masters and Johnson, very famous sexologist couple from the US. It basically describes that people go when they go through a phase of excitement, so with some desire for sex and maybe some genital responses, and then they actually go and engage in sexual activity, whatever it is. They reach a plateau or not. This can actually also be a straight line, but okay. And then they may climax or not. So this again, this already gives you a problem, like, because not everyone will sort of follow this line faithfully. But nevertheless, it gives you a way to look at things. And then after climax, usually there is a period of refraction, as it is called in sexology, where sex is sort of inhibited. You're not interested in sex anymore. And you can also try to structure this in more a common lay language, if you will, that there is a phase where you really want sex, you want it bad, Then you have it, you like it, and then after you like it very much, the reward is so big, it needs to be inhibited again. Okay, and the really important thing about this cycle is that we learn. Through this pleasure, we learn to want it again. And so this is sort of a revolving and reinforcing cycle. Okay, so this is a very important. So this is a very important principle, because it. This is just trying to make a case for vacuum cleaning. Because the motivation to engage in sex is enhanced, many studies have shown that, for instance, experimental animals will really work hard to when they have experienced sexual activity and sexual reward, they will do anything to get it again. So this is you probably don't know, but this is a rat on a grid that is electrified. And by pressing this lever, you can get access to a female. Okay, so that's working for sex. It's not as bad as vacuum cleaning, but okay, But it just shows that this is a very, very powerful system. You can researchers have taught birds to fly through to peck keys, and fish to swim through rings, whatever it takes to get this reward. So it just shows that animals and people are very motivated to engage in sex once they have experienced how pleasant it is. Well, another thing that can be that can actually happen, and that is I think very often neglected, is that sexual pleasure can be paired with virtually anything that is on the object or subject of sexual desire or in the environment during or when the sexual pleasure was obtained. Okay, and this is just the classical Pavlovian conditioning, which is a very important way of associative learning, where of course you know this, but there is the bell, right, and the animal doesn't care. I think it was a dog in the case of Pavlov, but okay. And then he gets a bowl of food, and he likes that very much. So this is an unconditioned response. The food gives an unconditioned response. Okay, and then through pairing of that initially very senseless stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus, in the end, the the bell comes to sort of predict the reward and becomes wanted. Okay, so this tells you at least two things: that if sexual preferences develop through this sort of pairing, they could trigger a genital or bodily response. So anything could become an incentive, right, to trigger a genital response. And such incentives, so like a bell, would trigger an expectancy. And that expectancy would be, say, a representation of sexual pleasure, a vague representation of that pleasure. And it would motivate people to approach whatever it is that they want. Okay. Now, there have been studies in humans that have sort of proven this point. And so these are two figures, right? So they're very abstract. And one of them is going to be paired with a sexual reward, and the other one is not. Okay. So the sexual reward, for those of you who don't know, so what do you think this is, by the way? Some of you might recognize it because it's in your house somewhere. I forgot to put the brand name. So this is a vibrator. It's amazing you didn't see, you know, but okay. It's a vibrator. And UCS means it's an unconditioned stimulus, which means that vibrating, so this was a study done in female subjects, and the idea was that so the idea is that stimulation of the clitoris with this device is pleasurable, and it is pleasurable in an unconditioned way, like the bowl of food was for Pavlov's dog. Okay, and the same, of course, goes for stimulation of the penis. These are very basic structures that are specialized for sex. So what happens? What happens? Well, the interesting thing is that after training, you know, pairing these two, so the showing this stimulus and then pairing it with that reward or doing nothing with the other stimulus, in the end gives you a vaginal blood flow response. Only to just the abstract stimulus that was paired with the clitoral reward. So that's quite amazing. After training, when this was shown, the vagina was perfused in a better way. Okay, so women actually started lubricating. And this is quite amazing. I wouldn't really make the comparison with the drooling dog of Pavlov, because people might get very mad with me. But the difference between this and Pavlov's dog is that the women in this study was actually conducted in Leiden. You know, this is really a Dutch thing. The difference here is that the women here in this study did not report subjective desire, so they didn't feel the desire, but nevertheless something happened between their legs. So it's also possible to do it in a different way and to train people with different stimuli. So these were men trained with similar abstract visual cues, right? And then these were coupled to naked women or dressed women or naked men or dressed men. And there was a variety of stimuli, but only one of them was paired consistently with a nude woman or nudish woman, okay? I'm not sure if this was not the stimulus from the set, by the way. And then they went on and did an Fmri experiment, so basically put people in a brain scanner and scanned their brains while these stimuli were all shown. So not in a paired way, but just showing the abstract stimuli, showing all the pictures that were used. And yes, when the nude woman was presented, this area of the brain, that you probably don't know, but I will tell you about it. This is the ventral striatum of nucleus accumbens, a very important area in the context of reward. was activated when this beautiful lady was shown. But after training, it also activated when only the abstract stimulus was shown. So this is another, it's not a classical conditioning paradigm because we don't really know whether this is an unconditioned stimulus or not. But it's still very, very interesting to see that the abstract stimulus sort of comes to predict the reward. It sort of comes to control sexual expectancy. Okay. Well, this brain response is dependent on dopamine. And dopamine you may know from Parkinson's disease, for instance. One of the main features of Parkinson's disease is that people are become very slow. They become very unmotivated. The other sort of side of the coin of Parkinson's disease would be something like cocaine use, where people become hyper-motivated. Okay? Now, the interesting thing about dopamine is that when it's released in the brain, it really drives attention to those cues that are salient for you in any given situation. And in the context of sex, these would be cues that predict a sexual opportunity. Okay? Well, this is an interesting study, again from Leiden. Leiden is an interesting place. But, so this is, you probably don't understand this picture, but I will walk you through it. So what they did is they put people in an fMRI scanner, and they showed them a number of pictures. And some of these pictures were shown very, very briefly. So only 30 milliseconds. That is so brief that you can't really process it consciously. So and especially when you show a picture immediately afterwards that is shown much longer, you really think that you saw this. You never saw this. So people are also tested afterwards, like, did you see it? No, I didn't see it. But in the brain, something happens. And what happens is that, again, this area of the brain activates when people don't see this, okay? Or they don't perceive it. And what is very interesting is that if you treat these people with compounds that agonize, so they give you more dopamine release, this one, levodopa, which is actually given to Parkinson's disease patients, and haloperidol, which is an antagonist for the dopamine receptor, so it blocks dopamine. It actually shows you that the response in this area is dependent on the dopamine levels. So the dopamine interacts with the salient cue. So when it's there, becomes active, becomes more active when there is more dopamine in the system. So this also tells you a little bit about the behavior of cocaine users, you know, when they become hyper-vigilant to any sort of sexual cue that may be around. Okay. Now, one very, very important aspect of sexuality that we cannot study in humans is the fact that first sexual experiences are likely to be really, really critical in the development of preferences. And for obvious ethical constraints, we cannot take adolescents, put them in our scanners, and have them, you know, let them have their first sexual experiences with us. That's not going to be possible. Even if we wanted to, okay? So it's really critical to be able to rely on animal models, and some of you may not, you know, be very enthusiastic about the idea that animals are being used for scientific research, but in this particular case, there is no other option. So, of course, this is you are all quite, most of you are all quite young, okay, but most of you are all quite young. But this is a title of a famous Cat Stevens song, by the way. So what is very, very interesting about these animals is that you can inflict almost any sexual preference on them. And this is an amazing study by Jim Faust in Canada, who trained rats, male rats, during their first, I think, 9 sexual experiences to have sex with a jacket on. So, so it's actually not in the picture, but they had jackets, little jackets, rat jackets, manufactured. And so the rat had the jacket on, and then he copulated with the male. He had ejaculations with the female. He had ejaculations with the female. And then, you know, everything was over, and then the next copulation again and again and again. Of course, there was a control group who did not have this treatment, if you will. Okay? And here we see the results of that. So this is the control group. Doesn't really matter what happens. This is the last test. They're not really interested in the jacket. For the group that wore the jacket during the training and who were used to wearing the jacket, it had a drastic impact on subsequent behavior when they were not allowed to have the jacket on during sex. Okay? Intromission latency basically means that they were not motivated to intromit. It took them a very, very long time to approach the female and actually mount her. They were really confused because the jacket became a cue for their sort of sexual activity, right? It predicted the sexual reward. It became part of their sexual context. This is probably weird for you guys, but rats ejaculate a number of times during a single trial. Okay, so rats can ejaculate, I think, up to 5, 6, 7 times. So the rats were also less motivated to ejaculate many times. So their sexual function was severely disturbed by not having the jacket on. And the jacket, I can tell you, is not part of the evolutionary history of the rat. Okay? Okay. Oh yeah. So this, I forgot to put this one on. This is an interesting drawing. But you can almost try to, if you try to translate it to a human situation, you can almost try to envision or try to infer how a sexual preference can sort of develop. You know, if you do this pairing long enough, maybe something like this could develop. People who are really into leather or other kind of textures, fabrics. Another very amazing thing is that rats can overcome an initial avoidant response to, for instance, something that is potentially dangerous or harmful to them. Animals, when they die, they rot. That's not a very, and actually humans do that too. And rotting animals, they give off a chemical compound which is called cadaverine, so other animals can actually recognize this. Some animals will actually approach this and eat it, and other animals will avoid it. And rats are animals that tend to avoid rotten animals. Okay, they will bury it or whatever. It is possible to send a female with this compound, have the male have its first sexual experiences with that female, and the male will come to prefer this scented female. So she smells very, very awful, okay, but he wants her nevertheless. Because he copulated with her and not with other females that did not bear this scent. So this is a very, very powerful system because the fact that this animal normally avoids these kinds of stimuli is something that is potentially important for, you know, sort of in the evolutionary history of this animal, but it's nevertheless overridden. Okay, so the next part of this talk will be about trying to get some clues on what it is that we like, what it is that makes this system powerful. And of course, there's many things that we can like about sex. And I must say that I'm not really the romantic type, so we actually never studied things like this. Okay? We cut right to the chase, and we study things like this. There is another reason for doing this, and that is also the animal studies give very strong clues that these are really the most powerful stimuli in the context of this associative learning. So it's also something that is relevant to know. So what does it look like? Well, I'm going to start with sexual arousal. And it's very difficult to explain what sexual arousal actually is. It involves genital responses, like an erection or lubrication of the vagina, engorgement of the clitoris, for example. But it's more than that. You know, it's not only the genital responses and the genital feelings, it's also this general state of arousal. Okay? And this arousal is really, really important for sexual arousal to work. And I have a little demonstration of that. I hope it works.
Happens. I love you.
Whoa! Smoking, smoking,
I think I want to hold this.
Yeah.
Ready? Yeah.
Yeah. Woo! 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 Whoa! I love it.
It's good.
Oh, I love it. Oh, I want to have an orgasm. Oh, yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Oh, so good. Oh, shit. Oh, I want to go down now. Oh, that was good. That was very good. Peter,
You're so crazy.
the orgasms I had with you are good, but this was really crazy.
Oh. Okay. Now okay. So what happened? What happened to her? She actually transferred from a state of general arousal to a state of sexual arousal, eventually orgasm. If of course this was true. If it was real, we don't really know whether this was real or not. We cannot really ask her. I tried to retrieve her, but I haven't been able to locate her. This is somewhere in the States. But it's a really interesting phenomenon. You would if you go and tonight look on the internet for you will find more movies like this. So the idea here is that a state of general arousal, right? General arousal meaning your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure rises, there is a massive adrenaline release, okay, noradrenaline in your head. This is a really important platform for sexual arousal to take place. People who cannot, well, not do this, but I mean people who cannot engage this level of arousal are many times very unsuccessful in achieving sexual arousal as well, let alone orgasm. On the other hand, people who are very quick, like the woman here, will achieve arousal and orgasm very quickly. Okay? This is also a problem very often in premature ejaculation. Arousal can be very pleasurable. It doesn't have to be. Arousal can also be frightening. The way you interpret it is really dependent on context and situation. But there really seems to be sort of an optimal, wave, how would you call it? Well, an optimal level of arousal that is pleasurable. And there's been some very interesting studies from music, where people are invited to a lab and they're allowed to bring their favorite music, and they're hooked up to all kinds of equipment, okay, to measure their arousal response, heart rate, blood pressure, and so on and so forth. And then they are asked to indicate when they feel a chill or shivers down the spine. You all probably experience them when you listen to music, and it's very beautiful. You can have this response, and this is an arousal response, okay. So here we see the music that they really like, and they also have a piece of control music that they don't think anything of. You know, it's just neutral, like the Drie's or something. And then this was a joke for Dutch people. Okay, it's good. Just to find out how many Dutch people are in the audience. What you can see here is that for all the indices of this arousal, okay, they all rise when these chills are being indicated, telling you that there is a correlate between arousal and pleasure. And this may also be true for sex. So what we've done in Groningen, so this was a couple of years ago, is we have invited people to the neuroimaging center where there's an fMRI scanner, and we have asked them to sort of stimulate each other. Well, actually the female stimulated the male, and asked them to go through two waves of sexual arousal. And the way the partner stimulated the male inside the scanner was through manual stimulation. Aftrekken in Dutch. Okay? And so it was actually a very simple design where we basically told these guys two things. Okay, there's going to be two waves of arousal. You can not ejaculate the first time, you can ejaculate the second time. So that's very simple. You have to keep things very simple for men, I have learned. So this is what it looks like. Again, it's very simple, okay? So you have to imagine there's the man laying in the scanner on its back, and there's his real-life girlfriend standing next to him and stimulating his penis during two waves, okay? So this is where the stimulation starts, this is where it ends, and then arousal comes back, and then it starts again. It's very simple. Now, here we have, because we also measured penile circumference, so basically the width of the penis. So this for one subject is what happened to his penis. And a penile erection is a very faithful reflection of sexual arousal. Okay, so here we go. Okay, it was very effective. And then this is where it ended, okay, and then it went back down again. And he actually was faster here, so maybe this is a learning effect, we don't know. And then, okay. And so this actually follows this model quite nicely. And what we can do is try and find traces of this response, okay, of these waves. We can try to find traces in the brain, and it will hopefully tell us something about the areas that are involved in arousal, sexual arousal. So if you do that, and this is the front side of the, so this is a brain that is cut like in half, like this. So we look from the inside out, and we see this is the front part of the brain, this is the back side of the brain, this is the cerebellum. And this is the brainstem to go down here. And so this is okay. What you have to look for are the colors. Nothing else is interesting really. And what we see here is there is orange colors indicating areas that are sex plus, meaning that they correlate with the arousal going up. When the arousal goes up, they go up when there is stimulation, and they go down when stimulation ends. Okay. The blue areas do exactly the opposite. So this gives you a way to disentangle systems in the brain that are either promoting arousal or are suppressing it. And you can find these systems not only in this, so this is a cortical part of the brain, so a relatively new area of the brain, but you can also find it deep inside the brain in areas like the hypothalamus. You can find the same sort of dichotomy. One cluster of cells promoting sex, the other cluster of cells suppressing it, so like a balancing system. Well, this is all very nice, but it doesn't appear to be really specific for sex. Here we see people trying to solve very difficult mathematical problems. And this is when they are really trying hard to find a solution. And we see this area of the brain activating. It's exactly the same area that correlates with penile erection and stimulation of the penis. And when the math is not very complex, we see this area of the brain basically the same area as we see here. So when people are more relaxed, this is what happens. So what we're looking at is really nothing that is specific for sex. This is a common arousal network or de-arousal network that sex uses as a platform to do its own thing. And of course, there were more areas active than these, and I won't not bore you with that, But I think it's a very important concept because it may explain why people can make a transfer. It may explain that people, like the girl you saw in the movie, actually jump from a general arousal state to a sexual arousal state because they are already in that mode that is shared with other arousal states. Okay, we've actually done things that are even more drastic. And I'm actually going back in time because these are studies that we performed around the year 2000. So that's actually quite a while ago with a different scanner, the PET scanner. And here we actually asked people to have an orgasm in the scanner. And I'm not really going to tell you about orgasm, but one of the things that we could do is see how people rated pleasure during some of the conditions that we asked them to do. And we saw that areas of the brain, so these are sections and showing you the corresponding sections. And the blue color indicates that these areas had decreased perfusion, meaning that they were less active, less involved. And the more aroused people said they were, and they were actually most aroused during orgasm, the less blood flow there was in these areas. And you can think, well, why is this important? You know, why would I even care? But the thing is that some of these areas are really, really important for our normal functioning. The fact that we can sit here today and not jump each other's bones is sort of partly due to the function of these areas that enable us to function in a socially accepted way, enable us to work within our moral framework, which hopefully is the sort of the generally accepted framework. So these are very, very important areas. If you ask people to solve moral dilemmas, these areas will activate, for instance, okay? And not deactivate, as is the case right now. Okay, so one of the interesting things about sexual arousal to me, but something that that you can really find, it's very hard to find any scientific evidence on, is that people change when they're aroused. I mean, I'm not going to ask one of you guys how you feel when you're aroused, but I mean, you are really messed up when you are aroused, and you're prepared to do things that you would otherwise never do. You are saying things that you would otherwise never say, okay? And I was waiting for that one. And maybe, just maybe, this is something that is very, very functional and very necessary to have sex in the first place. Okay? Maybe if we all behaved like we behave in a polite and sort of distant way, we never ever approach people. We never become so intimate that we are able to have a successful. God, it's getting Freudian. So this deactivation of these areas that we know are very important for morality, social boundaries, etc., etc. The deactivation of these areas may actually be very functional, and they may actually add to the pleasure of sex, because it's nice to lose your head from time to time. This very interesting study came out last year, and it's a study by two very dear colleagues and friends from the humanities, psychology department. Actually, Charmaine is in the audience today. You can meet her later on if you want. And it actually showed that women, when they are in a they're viewing a erotic movie that is actually a porno movie. Porno means that women like it. Okay, it's important. When they are when they're viewing this erotic movie and they are sort of from time to time asked to perform a task that is actually very disgusting, they will be more likely to perform that task when they are sexually aroused, as opposed to when they are not. Okay, so we actually can see here. This is from the paper. We actually see that also during the women in the other groups that view different movies, they also perform more than half of the tasks, but the difference is quite drastic. And these tasks were quite gross, like the women were asked to touch a cow's eye, for example, okay, or to touch a used condom that was not really used, but it looked like it was used. Okay. So this is really interesting. It shows you that whatever arousal is doing, it's sort of suppressing these systems that we have in our brain to avoid things that are normally aversive. So whenever you feel like you're acting funny, you know, that next time you have sex, this is normal, okay? When you say stupid things, this is normal. Okay. A very, very important aspect of sex is the fact that it releases lots of endorphins, opioids. And you've probably heard about endorphins. They are endogenous it's endogenous heroin, basically. But of course, not in that quantity. Endorphins are released also when you eat and do all kinds of pleasurable things, but especially during sex. And they're also released during female copulation. And this is a rat study, obviously. This shows that when female rats are given an injection of a compound that blocks the opioid receptor, and this compound is called naloxone, this is the acronym for that, it basically kills their subsequent sexual motivation. So they don't like the sex anymore, and subsequently they really stop soliciting for sex, they stop being motivated, and whenever a male comes around, they kick his ass. Okay? And so this shows you that so we have the arousal, which is important and probably very rewarding, but the opioid state is probably even more important. Well, one situation where opioids are especially important is orgasm, and this was already stated by John Money a while ago, and he said, because he worked with psychiatric patients and also heroin addicts. And he found that whatever they were experiencing and all the phases that they went through, it actually looked like whenever they had a shot of heroin, it looked like they had a pharmacogenic orgasm. So why did he say that? Well, first of all, there is a feeling of rush and extreme pleasure. Then there is a warm feeling and sedation. You really become very, 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 very quiet. An absolute absence of motivation. These people do not want to do anything for a while. And this is actually very pleasant, not to want anything, not to have to do anything. And then, and this is very important, in the long run, there is a coupling again to the craving of sex. So, first of all, there is this opioid reward state, which is coupled, and which eventually leads to decreased motivation in the short term, but in the long term, you want it more. And this is how addiction develops. This, of course, heroin is much stronger than endogenous opioids, but nevertheless, it gives you an idea about the strength of this system, because orgasm is probably the most powerful way, natural way, to release opioids. Okay, so in a way, we are all addicts. So whoever says, well, actually, the next lecture will be about sexual addiction, and maybe Gert-Jan van Zessen, who is a lecturer, will say that it doesn't exist, but I think it exists. I think we are all sex addicts. The only difference is that sex is a less powerful stimulant than heroin. Okay, back to Bill Gates. I promised you he would come back, and here he is. This is something that all of a sudden appeared on the internet 2 days ago, and it's Bill Gates offering 100,000 euro grant that can amount to $1 million. By the way, for that person or a scientist or student or whoever who comes up with a new condom. And this is really fascinating, okay? Because this is what the grant says, and I'm not sure if this is his own words or from the program, but he's looking for a next generation condom that significantly preserves or enhances pleasure. Enhances pleasure, so it needs to be more, right? In order to improve uptake and regular use, okay, and then it goes on. The primary drawback from the male perspective is that condoms decrease pleasure as compared to no condom, creating a trade-off that many men find unacceptable, particularly given that the decision about use must be made just prior to intercourse. We've just seen how your brain worked, right? Just prior to intercourse. It really doesn't work properly. Is it possible to develop a product without this stigma, or better, one that is felt to enhance pleasure? So this is actually saying, or calling for people who come up with a condom that is better than naked, okay? That gives you a better feeling than naked. This is actually saying that pleasure is the main incentive to have sex. Even Bill Gates thinks that pleasure is the main incentive to have sex. That's amazing. And what is especially amazing is that in Groningen we have been doing studies that more or less approximate this idea, okay? And we know, and Bill probably doesn't know, but we know that the human skin contains receptors that are tuned towards pleasant touch. And you can all try this, okay? So what I want you to do, and you can do it with your neighbor, which is nice because you can try and bond, but you can also do it with yourself if you are a shy person. If you are a shy person. So just take the other person's hand, okay? And very, very gently stroke the arm of the other person. Gently. About. Great. No, so this is for real. This is for real. Okay? So do it at approximately 3 centimeters per second. Okay? 3 centimeters per second. Gives you a pleasant feeling. Now do it very quickly. It's not very pleasant anymore, right? So this is a very... This sounds very silly. This sounds very silly, but we have special receptors in our skin that are tuned towards this. And that's a very good reason for that, because we all know intuitively that when we do that to another person, that person will be comforted, and it feels pleasant. Okay? It's a very important means of social interaction. Now, this has been done in Sweden, so they're actually brushing other people with brushes like this at different speeds, and they try to find in the brain where the preferred speed is located, or where there's a response to the preferred speed. Okay, so that's happening in this little area of the brain, which is the posterior part of the insula. Now, we have been doing this for penile touch. So we're using the same brushes on different sides of the penis, because if you think about it, if there is any area of the human skin that should contain receptors that are tuned towards pleasant touch, it should be the genitals, right? The problem with the Swedes is that they are too shy to do it. Well, we do it. This is a master student from psychology who is working on this project currently, Camilla de Jong, who's also in the audience. Very nice. And we're actually testing this on a number of sites for a number of speeds, because no one actually knows what the optimal speed is for the penis. And we're doing it on the penile skin. We're doing it also on the glands, which is a completely different ball game altogether. Okay. Okay. So another very interesting thing that we've been doing in Groningen is we've been working with 3 patients who were born with spina bifida, which is a neurological condition where the sacral spinal cord is damaged. And this is relevant in the context of sexuality because information from the genitals enters, so it's basically this part of the spinal cord, it enters the spinal cord here, and when this is damaged, it's basically not transmitted to the brain anymore. So these people do not have sensation, not always, but very often do not have sensation of their bladder or of their legs, proper sensation, and also sometimes not of their genitals. And when these people reach adolescence and adulthood, they sometimes have a wish to feel something. You know, I think that's very natural. And a surgeon, a plastic surgeon from Zwolle, Max Overgoor, developed a surgical technique where he creates a bypass from the still intact nerve of the penis to another nerve that is above this level of the lesion. So people are reconnected. The penises of these men are reconnected. So this is a really interesting group of people because they have never had sexual experiences. And then when they're reconnected, they start, you know, first of all, when you touch their penis, and you ask them, what do you feel? And they say, well, I feel my groin, because that's where the donor nerve comes from. Okay, and then after really after a year, 2 years, they gradually say, okay, I feel my penis, and then after a while, and I think this is after 2 or 3 years, they say, I can get sexually aroused by someone who touches my penis. I can get erections. So this is actually really amazing. And so it's in these people may actually be a natural knockout for genital sensitivity. And we have scanned these people. Of course, this is all very dirty, I mean, methodologically, because we have not done a series of studies. We did not follow them in time. We just looked at them there and then after they were reconnected and after they actually regained erotic sensitivity of their penis. And this is a very complex and busy picture, but just look at the red spots. This is the reconnected penis when it's stimulated. This is the other side where the donor nerve is still intact. And so this, because this is also where the donor nerve comes from the other side, so this, if nothing happened, should be exactly the same. And we should see no red color. But we do see red color in 3 subjects, all of them. And some of these red colors are quite consistent across subjects. And one of them, again, is in the posterior part of the insula, which may be a very interesting and important area for the development of penile sensation and sexuality. So all of this is very nice, but in the end, everything is determined by the fact that we are humans. And humans have an opinion about everything. And we give meaning to everything. So whatever our biology says, in the end, it's going to be the meaning that we attribute to it, and this meaning is determined by many other things that will say whether this was pleasurable or not. And this is very important. We have to go back to, first going to show you an example of how important this is from animal research. 20, 30 years ago, there was this general idea in sex science that animal rats did not enjoy sex. Because they could never be conditioned to learn anything from their sexual activity. And what happened was there was a box, the male would be put in, the female would be put in, the male was receptive because they have a cycle of 4 days, and then when they're receptive, the male approaches her and mounts her, and he goes back and ejaculates, etc. Okay? And it did not work. The female rats could not be conditioned. Then some researchers found out that this is a situation that is really not the way, it's not really the way rats in nature have sex. Okay? In nature, the female can run away from the rat, from the male. And the female can hide for the male, and she can decide when to come out and engage him in sexual activity. So in real life, in the wild, it's really the female who initiates sex. This is actually true for many animals, except for humans. Okay? So when researchers started putting divides in these boxes with holes that were small enough for the female to get through, but too big for the male to get through, all of a sudden she could control sex. And it became pleasurable, and it was possible to make her learn all kinds of things. This is a very simple thing, it's just a divide, but it shows you how important context is. By the same token, we can never say, because sometimes these things appear on the internet, and so women who has up to 100 orgasms a day, and the general reaction is, well, she should be very happy, 100 orgasms a day, woohoo! Who doesn't want to have that? Well, these people sometimes commit suicide because they're so desperate, they really want to get rid of that feeling. So even though everything is working, they are getting aroused, they have genital responses, they have general arousal, everything is there, but the context is not right. And the meaning of that sexual pleasure is not right. So it basically is perceived as something that is very aversive. I think that's very important, something that we don't really look at very often in sex research. Now, I hope I showed you that there are many ways to get into the sexual system, that sexual reward is very powerful, and hopefully, when you run across people who have very weird sexual preferences, you will understand them better. And I will leave you with this sort of beautiful story.
My heart's just going boom, boom.
Wow, he is really tall.
Yes, he is.
Oh my God. After 5 months, it's good to see you. He's just so noble, so proud, so strong. I not only love him for a sexual attraction, I mean, we're not talking about fetish here. I love him as a mate. I love the roundness of his counterweights at the top. I love him for the narrowness of his jibs. I love him for the elegant lines of his gondola, which is now covered up for the winter. I like the ribbing up underneath his name display there, too. The parallel lines that are coming down. You see where I'm talking about?
Oh, yes, I see it, yeah.
I love that. I'm thinking, oh, geez, you know what I'm thinking about. This is very personal. When I make love to him at home, when I start climaxing, I just keep saying over and over again, just as I'm starting to go over the edge, I just tell him, I want your fluids, I want your fluids, I want your fluids.
I did not expect to find a fence like this here at all. He's perfect. I mean, this is the shape that I like so much. These angles, fabulous.
You smell good. God, you smell so good.
Fences are such dangerous objects for me because they are so perfect in their geometry. I mean, I have to say there is a lot of physical stuff going on right now. I mean, and I think that happens between human relationships as well, but I'm definitely physically attracted to this fence. And I would like to get to know this fence better.
Wow, you are sweet. Very, very sweet.
An OS person talks to their beloved object, and the object communicates back by telepathy.
How many times over when we've made love at home have I asked you for... Look at me. Look at me and say it. I don't want to go. I'd rather stay here with you. It's never really goodbye to anyone. Because 1001 knocked, as I have told you many times before, and I will many times repeat it, I love you.
Thank you, Janniko. Tonight will be different. Huh? I think that there will be some questions, I'm sure. So, who can I hand over the microphone? There's a question over here.
Thank you.
I'm very curious about the fact. I would like to know, what do you think of the not unbiased people towards middle-aged people and at the age of my age, that they should not, or it is not natural to have fun with sex?
I will repeat it, okay? So if I understand correctly, the question is, how do you feel about people who think that it is not normal for middle-aged people or yeah, so that sex is something
enjoy
that
sex, but for the same, it's for
yeah,
middle-aged
so
and old people also fun.
So the question is that how do I think about people who think that sex is only for young people? I think that's that is a really silly remark, because sex is really for all ages. And what is really interesting about, even though we don't want to think about it, okay, but it is. It happens. Your parents do it, okay. So and the reason why they do it. The reason why they do it, hopefully, is that it's pleasant, and whatever. So the general idea is that whenever a woman hits menopause, you know, and of course her gonadal hormones, the estrogens, they become less, and then she's basically living in extended time, you know, and so sex is not an option for her anymore, etc., etc. But it really seems that sexual experience, especially experience with sexual reward, is very, very protective against the effect of menopause. So to put it very simply, if you enjoyed sex when you were young, you're also going to enjoy it when you're old. So young learned, you know, what is it? Is that a Dutch? Is that a English? Yeah. In any case, in any case. But I think the point is clear, you know. And so that's, I think that's a very important point also in educational programs, that people should learn that this is something that they can really benefit from when they reach an older age. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Okay.
There are several questions at the end. So in the meantime, I can ask you the question. You showed us brain scans of males.
Yes.
How does it differ for females? Is there a difference or not?
As far as we can tell, no. At least not for the... So we didn't do all the studies in men and women, but the comparisons that we have made did not show major differences. What really seems to be different is the way they enter this pleasure cycle. So there may be other incentives that women generally like more, and there's also if you assume, so if we just talk about women who have a normal cycle and no hormonal contraceptives, it's really true that around the time of ovulation, their dopamine system becomes much more sensitive. So that is and in men it's always sensitive, you know, so it doesn't matter. But in women, so that is a difference. So also when all the studies that use these visual stimuli, it's really important to control for the effect of the ovulatory cycle, because when it's not done properly, you get differences that really are no differences, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yes. If I do memorize it correctly, it was in the news recently that men that do more like doing the dishes and cleaning the house and use the vacuum cleaner have less sex as compared to men that don't. Do you have any idea what the mechanism is behind it?
I didn't know about that, so you're the first one to tell me. It's actually a very good reason not to clean the house anymore. But my wife is here, so I need to be careful. I really don't know. I really don't have a proper answer for that question, I'm afraid. No.
I had a couple of questions on the conditioning of preferences that you talked about earlier. Do you believe that this conditioning can also be effective outside of actual sexual intercourse? For instance, can you condition a preference through the use of, I don't know, for instance, pornography with no actual sexual stimulus present?
That's a very, very good question. I think it's possible, probably less effective. But the thing is, I'm not sure if that's what you're aiming at, but of course, internet pornography and other outages of pornography are sort of a hot topic right now, and whether we could actually learn our sexual activity from viewing that kind of sexual activity. I think conditioning may play a role, especially when people get erect. For instance, men get an erect penis from seeing it, and it feels pleasurable, and they may reinforce that. But I think there is also another type of learning that I have not talked about in this talk, where it's more almost like an empathic response. You sort of understand what is happening to the people on the screen, and it's resonated upon you. And this is something that humans are very good at, right? If I see any of you perform an action, it sort of resonates in me, and I'm sort of repeating that action sort of automatically. And it's a different way of learning. It's probably a form of social learning, which I totally ignored, so it's a very valid point. But I think it's something that is potentially very important. But we don't really know how it links to dissociative learning. It could also be part of it. But that's an excellent question.
I actually had a follow-up question on the onset of preference. So if you mentioned that the onset of preference is critically linked to the first sexual experience, that the first sexual experience is very important for how this preference develops. But if this preference can develop outside of sexual activity, how do you actually know if this first sexual activity is that important, if the onset is actually impossible to predict or retroactively determine?
Yeah, so it's true. It is in humans. It's actually important it's impossible to tell what caused the preference, but what was the major driving force behind the preference. So everything we know about this, or almost everything we know about this, comes from these conditioning studies in animals. But what we do know is that that this conditioning works much, much stronger in animals that are not experienced than in animals that are experienced. So there is, I think, very good reason to believe that this could also work in a very similar way in humans. But you're right, it's a situation that experimentally is not, it's really impossible to be sure that it was that sexual experience that determined the preference. And there's other experiences that people have with people that are potentially pleasant that could also be of influence. For instance, it is known both from animal research and there are some indications from human research that people tend to be attracted to people that look like their opposite sex parent. Okay, which is also but that only happens when they have a good relationship with that person. So there could be other rewards that add to preference. Yeah.
I had one final question, if that's okay. I was wondering if this conditioning can actually be adjusted, modified, or even reversed.
Okay. Yes. So there have been, in humans at least, there have been attempts to convert people with a homosexual orientation to make them heterosexual, and there have been other attempts, for instance, also in pedophiles, by virtue of aversive conditioning. So every time they would see their preferred stimulus, they would, they would get a shock or something that would make them really nausea or something like that. These attempts have not been very successful, and the reason for that, I believe, is that once we get these people, their preference is crystallized. And it's really difficult to do something about it. And in that sense, it's not really a choice that people have. It's a neurobiological choice, but it's not a metaphysical choice. It's not free will. And so from that perspective, only when people are, I think the only programs that have been successful were in people who were really motivated to change. And there the conditioning sort of worked, but it didn't work in many other people.
Okay. No. Thank you.
Okay. How much would you get from participating? Is that the question? I'm not seeing where you are. Oh, there. Actually, I forgot to put on the slide that we are still looking for volunteers. So that's a very good point. I forgot to put my email address. God, that's stupid. Well, of course, I can't disclose that information. But if you retrieve my email address, I will be happy to tell you. Okay.
I also have a question on the first cut is the deepest slide. I'm here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Would this mean that since, well, I think at least a lot of males have their first sexual experiences masturbating, would this mean that males would prefer to have sex without women, at least at the point of orgasm, and would that partly explain why we tend to become less moral toward the climax? There is an interesting phrase in the book by Kluun, Daar komt de vrouw bij de dokter, in which he says that sex really is masturbating together. And this I find a very strange phrase, but if you're right, and the first 100 orgasms are during masturbation, then...
I think that's a very good point, and masturbating is a very important way of part of adolescent life, and it is entirely possible that preferences are developed, and that's also something that we haven't talked about, right? Fantasies. That's also something that humans are very capable of and very active in. But just imagine a 12-year-old boy being in his parents' bedroom. You know, no one's at home. He's lying on the floor. He doesn't want to be discovered. You know, he starts masturbating, and there is this leather boot of his mother lying under the bed, you know, and he masturbates and he has an ejaculation, you know, and the leather boot is next to him, and the next time he does it again. What would happen? No one knows. But normally, a sexual experience with a real life other person would probably be more rewarding, and that has something to do with the physiology of the penis, because the vagina is a really, really powerful stimulant of the penis. It also has something to do with the fact that, because I've approached this in a very mechanistic way, but the fact that you can interact with another person, that you're actually falling for that person, that you're in love with that person, that you're actually bonding with that person, is also a very powerful, rewarding stimulus. So it is a difficult question, and so I don't want to go, because the risk is that, you know, you say, well, we stop masturbating because, you know, that's how we develop fetishes. Well, masturbating is actually a very important way of discovering your own body, and most problems occur when people do not masturbate. Actually,
couldn't you just test it with rats? Give them some opportunity to do it without a female the first 100 times, and then see whether they would prefer. Well, this should be feasible.
Well, you mean like they would penetrate something artificial?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's actually not a very bad idea.
Okay.
We could.
Well, please mention me in your paper. Then.
No, I will mention your name definitely. No, but I think that's not a bad idea at all. In fact, you know, in breeding. In breeding programs, for instance, for horses and bulls, you know, that's exactly what they do, right? They just have these tubes, and they lubricate them. They have them at the right temperature, and then the bull just mounts this thing, and then ejaculates. He seems to be quite happy with it, but maybe he's happier, you know, interacting with a real live cow. I don't know, but this is an interesting thought, I think.
Are there any other questions? If not, I would like to thank you once more for this very interesting lecture and for your interesting view about sex, and thank you for all the messages you gave to us. Thank you very much.